You can get ad-free episodes of the Forest School podcast, as well as bonus episodes and exclusive access to upcoming guests to ask them questions before anybody else finds out about it, simply by visiting patreon.com/Children of the Forest.
It's windy. It's windy in the woods.
A little bit of nice summer breeze. Boo, 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 boo. Da, 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 in my mind.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah.
I feel slightly delirious.
I know. Listeners, we've just done 2 sessions in the woods back to back. Our first ever forest school for grown-ups, which was, oh my gosh.
Oh, it was amazing.
So nice. So good. Just chilling out, crafting, cooking soup, having a lovely time. Followed swiftly by our family session. So yeah, we're a little bit tired and maybe a bit bonkers. But this
is Allie's podcast.
Which one is this again?
We're chatting to Allie in a bit. We have to pretend that we're not recording this afterwards. People are hearing this at the start, so you have to pretend.
What?
You have to pretend that they're about.
There's no pretense needed
we're
now.
About to go and do it.
We've burst that bubble.
Oh.
That illusion's gone. So we chatted with Allie the other day, and oh my gosh, it was such a great chat.
Oh, it was very nourishing.
It was lush. It was talking all about Allie's book, The Autistic Guide to Adventure, and what did we talk about?
Oh, we talked about loads of stuff. We talked partly about the book and about why it came about and who the book is for, who might be using it. And then also we talked about the wider sort of ideas around autistic adventurers and their visibility, and the implications that the outdoor community can inadvertently, say that word slowly, can have on like public perception and what we can do to be thinking about that and going forwards.
And how leaders can be mindful about perhaps sensory challenges of particular environments or activities.
Yeah, neurotypical or neurodivergent leaders, how important it is for, and a lot of that was in there, wasn't it, about the book and how great it is for, it's not just a book for autistic people or for autistic leaders, it's about anyone, how they can make their practice more inclusive.
Yep.
You listener, you might learn something to make your practice more inclusive, which can only be good.
Indeed.
Can only be good if your practice is more inclusive.
Yes.
Do you know what? I'm slightly doolally as well. Oh, I'm punching the phone. It's because, well, we've got I need to thank our patrons, so I need to thank Julie and Rachel and Emma and Candice and Sarah and Claire and Heidi and Louise and Michael and Anna. These guys are supporting us on Patreon, and it is. I've been I'm throwing everything at Patreon now.
Are you?
I'm doing live streams on Friday mornings, and then I'm taking those live streams. So the live stream I did the other day, I was wandering around while I was doing a bit of maintenance, and I was chatting about what we're up to, what's seasonally happening, what activities are going on in the woods, just a bit of extra chat, and then I'm taking that audio. So some people are watching that live, but I'm taking that audio and I'm putting it into the Patreon podcast feed. So some people are getting, it's about half an hour a week of extra waffle chat. Where they with loads of like nuggets and stuff in there. You and I are still doing bonus episodes, like we did the quiz the other day.
Yes, Lewis gave me a very fun quiz.
And we're also now putting up advert-free versions of the podcast on Patreon. So those people have their own private feed and they can go advert-free and more content. So if you want to support us on Patreon, we would be eternally grateful. We will shout your name out. We will give you all this extra stuff because it really helps us to do the free podcast. You might be in a position to help us out, which means that we can keep the podcast free, which means that people can keep getting access to it. We can keep this like CPD train rolling. If you do feel like you can help us out, it's patreon.com/Children of the Forest, and it's from as little as $2, which is about £1.50 right now, a month. £1.50 a month for half an hour a week of streams and bonus episodes and advert free, and mate, value for money. It's hard to come by these days. But
you can barely get a pint of oat milk for that.
Well, there you go.
Of oat milk.
A litre of oat milk. We're better than a litre of oat milk. And cheaper.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, please enjoy this chat with Ali.
Yes.
And we'll see you in a bit.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School Podcast.
Let's go! Sorted. Hello. Lovely people. We have to pretend. So, Ali, what we do now is we pretend we haven't already been talking and we just chat again. Like this is the start, like it's completely fresh.
It's just so professional.
I love that.
Hyper professional. We're here with Allie Mason. I was going to say, you sent us your book. I've got this book now and I have no idea how I got it, other than I got it from Wem.
I know because we got it from your publisher, from Jessica Kingsley. And it is called The Autistic Guide to Adventure. And so, Lewis and I have been reading it, and we're really so glad that we could get to speak with you as well and get a bit of the kind of inside journey about how this book came about and more information about some of the stuff that you write about. So thank you so much for giving us your time. I guess I'm going to start with the first question, which is what inspired you to write the book?
So firstly, thank you very much for having me. It was a great honour to be invited on the podcast. I'm a little disappointed it didn't get dropped off by fairies. I thought you said the book was going to have appeared magically in your garden overnight. So the realistic logistics of that was a bit disappointing. However, what inspired the book? Excellent question. I think it feels so long ago now because I proposed this book to the publishers in 2020.
Wow.
So it's been 3 years. But thinking back, I'm pretty sure the inspiration for the book was the fact that I simply couldn't find this in the world at the time. It was something that I was looking for. I was looking for a resource for autistic people about getting outdoors, about being more active, how to access those things with the kind of challenges that come with being autistic, but also how to use our strengths as well to get the most out of those activities. And nothing like this existed, and I'm pretty sure to this day, this is the only kind of book of its kind at the moment. I do hope that there will be more. I do hope that people will read it and think, oh, yeah, actually, I've got something to say about that. And we'll get a bit more kind of conversation around this topic. But yeah, that's really how it came about. It was the fact that I needed it and it didn't exist. So I did all the research and then I thought, well, I may as well share this with everyone. There's no gatekeeping here. We want to share the knowledge.
Amazing. So is that something that you feel like you've needed sort of for a long time through your life? Like, what's your relationship with nature been like and your journey into the outdoors? Can you tell us a bit about that?
So growing up, I was outdoors quite a lot simply because my parents were involved with the Scouts and Guides. So my dad was a Scout leader, my mum was a guide leader. And so kind of as a young child, sort of primary school age in the UK, I did spend a lot of time outdoors, but I always found it very hard. I always found it very challenging. And the rest of my family are naturally outdoorsy people, as you might expect from them doing that in their spare time. And my younger brother took to it like a duck to water, so that was always really easy for him. And I was there kind of wanting to get involved and wanting to be a part of it, but really, really struggling and not kind of understanding why. And then as I got older, kind of secondary school age, teenager, I just retreated really into books. I had all of my adventures through books. I explored the world through the pages of The Hobbit and, you know, the Lord of the Rings and all that good fantasy stuff. But always wish that I was out there doing it myself. And my brother remained a very active, very sporty, very adventurous person as he grew up. And I kind of watched him having all of the experiences that I wanted to have for myself. And sometimes I'd try, sometimes I'd go along with him. Sometimes we'd do stuff as a family. Sometimes I'd even go and try and do stuff on my own. But again, it was always kind of facing these invisible barriers. And at the time, I wasn't diagnosed as autistic. So I had zero kind of understanding of what those barriers were. And it was only until much later, at the age of 23, when I got my autism diagnosis, that I finally realized, right, okay, so I've got sensory issues, there's communication issues, social interaction, the need for routine and that kind of stuff. So it all really fell into place, and kind of opened the doors to a new relationship with nature that I'd never had before.
That's really interesting. Well, actually, one of the questions that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you is that the subtitle of the book is Active Pursuits from Archery to Wild Swimming for Tweens. Tweens, I'm still not comfortable with this word. Tweens and teens.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about, like, why choose that age range? But it sounds like maybe that was the age that it sounds like maybe you felt you missed out on. So is that why it's aimed at this age group, or was there another reason?
Yeah, no, definitely. You've hit the nail on the head there. Whilst I chose the title for the book, I didn't choose the subtitle. And when the publishers came back with for tweens and teens, just like you, tweens, I kind of got really stuck on that. I was like, what is a tween? What does this mean? But yeah, very much that when I was diagnosed and when I found out I was autistic, there was a period of grieving for a childhood that I could have had if I'd had that diagnosis earlier. And part of that grieving process was how many different things I could have accessed if I'd only known, had a label for what those challenges were and had kind of accessible solutions for overcoming them. And you may or may not have noticed that I did actually dedicate the book to my younger self. Because I said in the start, for Alex, I promise it gets better, because that's what I really wish. I know it's a little bit sad, but it's also a full circle moment to be able to honor what she went through and to say, I've turned this into something really positive that's going to help a lot of people not get stuck in the same place that I was.
That is massive, isn't it? There's a thing, I can't remember where I've seen it, but there's a thing that's like, oh, you need to be, as an adult, you need to be who you needed when you were a kid. And that
100%
is, yeah, that's huge. Do you think there's, so that obviously was like a big life experience for you, and that ended up with the book being about this kind of age range. Do you think in 5-10 years time, you would write a similar thing in a different way for adults? Or do you think this is like, because to me, nothing in the book necessarily says this is just for teenagers. You know, all of these things are, I can see someone in their 30s who approaches this stuff and go, oh yeah, I want to start trying new stuff. Do you think you would have written anything differently for an older age range, or? Thanks to everybody that's rating and reviewing on Spotify and iTunes. It really helps us to find new listeners and share what we're doing with more and more people.
So I really like the fact that you've said that, and I'm really, really glad that as kind of adult readers yourselves, you're reading this book and you're thinking, as somebody who is not a tween or teen, I can still resonate with the stuff that's in here. I can still kind of get value from the advice. And I have noticed since the book has been published that, you know, there's a whole age range of people who are accessing it and who are using it. And that's really fantastic that it's not just limited to kind of the audience that it was aimed at, if you like. And I think kind of building from that, a lot of what I would have written for a different age of audience would have been very similar, simply because I think the concepts and even the execution are equally applicable to those different age groups. I think sometimes you just need to go into these kind of activities and trying something new with an open mind, but also an element of self-deprecation. You kind of have to go into it thinking, do you know what? Perhaps I'm going to be really bad at this. Perhaps I'm not going to be the best kayaker the world has ever seen. And I might not even get better the more I do it. I just might be less likely to drown. And that in itself is, you know, a great achievement. So on the one hand, I would say that I do really hope that a broad age range accesses the book, finds it useful. And even if I was to write another book in time, covering similar things specifically targeted at an older age group, I'd probably go with the same kind of vibe, and I'd probably go with the same kind of approach, because we all need to tap into our inner child. And that's something that's definitely missing in a lot of adults these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the way that the book uses the profiles of people who have taken part in the particular activity, and sort of, you give your breakdown and any kind of sensory and social potential challenges that the activity might have, and some of the equipment. And there's some really great illustrations in the book as well, which I really love, kind of illustrating some of the equipment, because I think that just the equipment is such a barrier for some people. Like, I was just talking to my other half the other day, and he was saying, I could really get into like road cycling, but the gear, oh my God, and it is just, to have like little illustrations of some of the stuff that you might need to wear or to have with you, I think it's really invaluable. But yeah, going back to the sort of little interviews or profiles of the people, what was it like kind of connecting with those people and finding them? Did you kind of know a lot of those people already, or how was that process? What was that like?
So I think I will not be lying if I say that I didn't know any of these people before.
Oh, wow.
I included them in the book. I think there may have been people who I knew kind of on a broad social media kind of way. There was probably people that I followed and that I admired, or who I was aware were doing kind of similar work, who I then reached out to. But I've definitely only built the relationships that I have with the people that I've profiled in the book from them being in the book, which is a really, really nice thing. And it is 100% my favorite part of the process has been interviewing those people, getting to know them, inviting them to be a part of the project, getting their feedback, because community is such an important aspect of being outdoors, of accessing the outdoors, of learning how to access the outdoors, because I think that's another barrier that people don't always consider, is the fact that if you haven't grown up being an outdoorsy person or being outside, if your family haven't taken you, if you haven't gone with school, if you haven't had friends where you all just kind of went and hung out in the local park or whatever, then nobody taught you how to be outside and how to connect with nature. And it's not always an innate thing. It's not something that you're just born with. And it's like, wow, I can commune with trees and talk to birds. Like, we're not all Snow White, unfortunately. So I think that process has been really, really beneficial for me, and learning as well how different autistic people experience the world, because we have this phrase that is overused, but nevertheless still incredibly true within the autistic community, which is when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And there are people who talk about their experiences in the book who are my complete opposites. Like, we've got somebody in the book who really enjoys stand-up paddleboarding and kind of water sports that involve being in the water, swimming and that kind of stuff. I'm all for sitting on top of it, but I have no interest in getting in it at all. Like, that is not for me. I really, really hate that feeling of being submerged within water. But it would have been a disservice to readers for me not to include that, just because I personally don't like it. And so it was really important for me to make sure that there was a vast array of experiences that were included, and that they also challenged kind of my preconceptions and my notions of what's nice and what's not nice to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that idea that you're describing about community really comes through, as well as the kind of encouragement to try different activities and give them a go. There is that encouragement that really comes through as well about kind of connecting with other autistic people and celebrating that really comes through. I think that's especially
I just flicked open the book randomly, and it happened to open at Stuart's page.
Yes, I was going to mention Stuart. We met Stuart at the Forest School Southwest conference.
Yes,
and he had the book with him, and we were speaking with him. And yeah, he really, in his little kind of profile, he really kind of champions reaching out to other autistic people and linking up with them and that kind of thing, which is really good.
It's amazing. It's a really useful tool. I mean, you've talked about it in a few different places in this book, Allie, about the the need for like more visibility and for the autistic community to be seen in these outdoor spaces. And so it's amazing having, like you say, not just having your own views and this is my like personal memoirs, but like sharing all of these people. And although it seems very silly, having pictures of them is massive. Having a photo of the person and being like, oh right, that's a person. Yeah. And I can see.
And amazingly, that's an autistic person, and we don't all look the same. Like there is no, you can't. I think the difficulty around visibility for autistic people is that it is an invisible disability. So it is often something you can't tell about a person just by looking at them. I sometimes say autism is not a facial expression, so you can't just look at me and go, gosh, yeah, she's autistic. But it is very useful to, where possible, visibly be autistic in the outdoors and in nature, and you know what that looks like is different for everybody. But for example, for me, like regardless of where I'm hiking, I will always have poles with me because my balance is atrocious. I will fall over the flattest surface that exists on this earth, and I have been known to do so. And you know, somebody can look at me and they're like, okay, so she needs support and that's why she's using these, and maybe they'll be curious, they'll be interested, and they'll be like, we're literally walking down a straight road, why are you using hiking poles? And I'll be like, well, let me tell you a little bit how being autistic affects my balance. And then that opens up that conversation. Not that anybody has ever harassed me in a field asking me why I'm using hiking poles, but if they did,
you're ready.
Personally, I'd welcome that. I'd be like, yeah, let's have a chat. Let me tell you why this is how it is.
I was reading some stuff the other day about hypermobility and its links with ADHD and autism, and that's really interesting as a like one of the ways that these things can all be linked together.
Oh yeah.
Allie, I was wondering, did you have anything that like, so you talked about some, not all of these are like your personal favorites, you're not necessarily going to go and do any of these. Were there any that either you wanted to get in the book and you didn't for whatever reason, or were there any that someone else was really pushing to get in the book and you kind of went, nah, we're not doing that?
Do you know what? I honestly can't think of any examples of that. I think that I was really fortunate that Jessica Kingsley gave me a lot of freedom, if you like, in what was included, and deciding what made the activity list was a very collaborative process. I suggested things, they suggested things, we narrowed it down together. And I think it was more about finding a theme for the whole book. That's really what I wanted to work with. And I tried my best to make the majority of the activities things that you can do on your own if you want to, because something that I've really struggled with as an autistic person, kind of getting outdoors and engaging with an active lifestyle, is there's often quite a lot of pressure to be social whilst doing so. There can feel like there's a lot of pressure to be part of a group or part of a team or join a club or do it with somebody. And sometimes I'm up for that. Sometimes I'm in a social mood, my battery is well charged, and I've got the capacity to not only try a new activity, but also to do it whilst interacting with another human being. However, for autistic people, our social batteries deplete incredibly quickly, and there will be days where we would have to choose, are you going to be social and interact with somebody, or are you going to do this activity that you really like and you're really interested in? And I wanted for people to have that option, to be able to choose the activities, and for there not to necessarily need to be another person involved if they didn't want them to be. So that's kind of how I narrowed down which ones were included in there. And that's why there's no kind of team sports in there. There's nothing that requires, very often, kind of like two people have to be there together. There's a couple that are a little bit like that. I'm thinking of climbing, for example, and having someone belay for you and that kind of thing. But overall, that was the gist that I was going for.
And there's some there that even, I mean, so people might have listened to the title of this book and might be thinking that this is
essentially extreme sports. But there's so much in there that I think, so there's ones in here like foraging and, stargazing and things that are like, I think we were talking to someone the other day and they were saying about how it's really one of the challenges for neurotypical leaders can be anticipating sensory needs. If they're not experiencing themselves, they can't then imagine it and go, well, this, so I think stuff like stargazing is one of those things where you might, from a place of, if you don't have sensory needs, you might go, well, it's just stargazing, isn't it? There's nothing that needs, considering there. That's a very inclusive activity. It's all done, no further adjustments needed. Dust your hands off we go. And even just having a few of those sort of low, I was going to call them low arousal activities, and that's not what I mean. I mean low impact, low physical exertion, maybe activities really highlights that need for like just more consideration. You will never need to go back to mundane marshmallows ever again. My book, Forest School Cooking, covers everything from how to build ovens to cooking in new and exciting ways, and a whole load of easy and amazing recipes that your groups will love. Order your copy today on Amazon.
100%. I think it was really important for me to make sure that all of the activities included would appeal to as broad an audience as possible and be as accessible as possible, because I'm trying to think how to say this sentence. Like, even for autistic people, you've probably got a lot of other stuff going on. Like, for example, you mentioned the comorbidity with hypermobility. You might have other disabilities going on. You might have mental health issues going on. You might have people that you want to get outside with who they themselves have different disabilities or barriers going on. Or you might be a mixed group of kind of able-bodied neurotypical people and disabled neurodivergent people. And it's kind of trying to make sure, to the best ability that I could, that within those 35 activities there was a really good range that people could pick and choose from and adjust depending on their circumstances, depending on who was there, depending on what their energy levels were for that day, what their support needs are. And you're absolutely right that for people who've never had to consider what an activity is like from a sensory perspective, it's so incredibly difficult to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who has those sensory needs. And even as somebody who has quite high sensory needs, I struggle to put myself in the shoes of somebody who has the opposite to me. So, for example, I'm very sensitive to light, I'm very sensitive to sound. So in those scenarios, I'm very much a sensory avoider, in the sense of I will put whatever adjustments in place that I can to make sure that those particular elements are not going to be disabling me more than necessary. But there's going to be people out there, autistic or not, who love light and who love sound and who love to be surrounded by that and who are sensory seekers in that respect.
I'm just smiling. Sorry to interrupt you, Allie, but I'm just smiling because I don't know if you can hear it, but my autistic son is currently drumming so loudly. I'm like, we struggling to concentrate because he's really, really going for it. Just talking about sensory seeking.
That's incredible. Because we can't hear that at all.
That's great. I'm so glad. Oh God.
But B, what perfect timing. What absolutely perfect timing. You would never catch me drumming loudly for a second. So that is just a great example. And I would struggle to put myself in his shoes. I would struggle to imagine what would he need from an activity where he's going to want that level of stimulation, because that's not me. That I literally spend my life trying to avoid that. So I think my advice would be in those scenarios for whether it's a neurotypical person approaching neurodivergent accommodations, or whether you're neurodivergent yourself and you're just trying to understand the people who are like the opposite to you or a different mix of traits than you are. If possible, kind of create a checklist that you can go through. So we've got resources like this book now. More and more resources are becoming available. Even if they're not books, there are now more kind of social media posts, websites, blogs around this. Read everything that you can, watch everything that you can, whatever format you like to access your information in. But then if something pops up that you're like, I never would have thought of that, make a note of it, however you prefer to do that, so that you can always refer back to it. And if possible, kind of group those things together so that when you're planning an activity or when you're planning to go out with friends who are different to you or whatever it might be, you can just go through that checklist and be like, right, okay, so I know today that I've got, I don't know, 5 sensory seekers and 3 sensory avoiders in my group. So how am I going to tailor the activity so it's suitable for both groups? How am I going to make sure that I have enough resources available, enough people available to be able to cater to that? Because you're not often going to be able to kind of show up and just have people of all the same needs all at the same time. There's always going to be that level of kind of adjustment and adaptation.
And this is the kind of approach that like needs to be everywhere. This is
normalized. It needs to be normalized.
It just needs to be spoken about more. And you know, if you're thinking about any environment where you're going to have a lot of people, like school or public transport or all these kind of places where, you know, people congregate and people need to be in a certain amount of, you know, for a certain amount of time, and it's not normalized yet, is it?
It's not. No.
I think as well, there's a massive, even more so than like I get what you're saying about like schools and all the, you know, there's places where people are going to interact with each other and have different needs. But I think there's also something that this book is, it feels like it's part of that wider movement to me that is like, there's a cultural thing, particularly in the UK, in some bubbles, which is that like going outdoors or being in nature in some way has to come with a degree of like hardship or suffering or like grit. You know, that kind of attitude of like being outdoors is about like getting through it. Like I'm doing a real masculine face right now. People can't see. It's about getting through. It's about dealing with the elements. It's about, you know, like there's a, I think a subculture of like nature or like the outdoors and comfort, and that those two things are not polar opposites, that like lots of people are, for various reasons, feel excluded from the outdoors because they are already in a place maybe where extra discomfort is not needed, or they don't have the financial, social, economic tools to deal with that discomfort. And like the more we can do with work like your book to go, you can be outdoors and comfortable, they're not mutually exclusive choices, you know.
Yes,
I think that's
you've
huge.
managed to touch on one of my biggest pet peeves about the kind of outdoor adventure communities, and that is the what's the right way of saying it? It's kind of the championing, if you like, or the platforming of unsupported adventures and unsupported activities. It really gets on my goat when people who are able-bodied and neurotypical and have, as you were saying, you kind of, you know, like social capital, financial capital, whatever it might be, people who have in some ways privileges within the world will say, I'm going to do this great big grand adventure, and even better, I'm going to do it unsupported. Nobody's going to be there to help me. And as you said, the focus is really on kind of the hardship and the grit and the suffering. And that is such an exclusive storyline to perpetuate. That is such a kind of unnecessary layer to put on accessing the outdoors and accessing adventure, because if you put me in a scenario like that, me as an autistic person with high sensory needs, I'm going to have a meltdown and I'm probably not going to recover from that for like months. I'm going to be very, very traumatized. And it's just not necessary. Why can't I engage with that thing with the support that I need to be a functioning human being? I'm not saying that I want people to help me to the point where it's not my own achievement anymore. I just want to level the playing field so that I have the same access as everybody else. And I just don't see that conversation happening at any kind of level that it needs to within the adventure communities, in terms of we need to stop perpetuating this unsupported is superior narrative. And I think it's something I have a little waffle about in the book as well, because it just gets me. It really bothers me.
You do. You at the end, and I wanted to ask you to tell us more about the manifesto at the end of the book.
Yes. Oh, now you've put me on the spot, because I should really have a copy next to me, but I don't. But the manifesto was very important.
It's 2 pages. Do you want me to read it? I can go for it.
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
So you've made it to the end. That's an achievement in and of itself. So I now consider the first step towards becoming an adventurer complete. I'm glad you've decided to come along on this journey with me, and that you've chosen to learn more about all of this awesome active pursuits that are out there and to get involved with. This time of your life is perfect for trying our new sport activity, especially as schools and colleges often have so many things that you can take part in. I didn't make the most of that when I was your age, so I'd recommend not repeating my mistake. I'm going to leave you with something to live by. If you're old enough to be on social media, you've maybe watched a few extreme sports documentaries like me. You might have noticed that a lot of these athletes are hyped up for tackling their adventures unsupported. I get that this happens for a reason, but I'm here to argue that it's not particularly healthy or indeed helpful when people proudly declare that they are taking something seemingly insurmountable challenge unsupported, without backup, without the help of others or aid. They're sending out a message, whether they intend to or not. And that message is, if you need support to achieve something, that achievement is somehow worth less than theirs. And that's simply not true. I won't carry on because there's more bits there, but that's summed up.
I'll tell you what, that's a lot more eloquent than what I just said, isn't it? But yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And it's so interesting as well to hear somebody else read your words. I have very few opportunities to hear people read from the book, and that's actually
to start if you want. Chapter 1. Right. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And so for me, it was really important to include this manifesto and to make that point, and also to have the page at the end that says being autistic and adventurous means, and we've got it set out so that you can kind of like photocopy if you want and stick it on your wall or something, or take a picture and save it on your phone.
That's a good idea.
But I wanted people to have something to go away by, because you know, the book is relatively long. You know, we've got 200 and something, or maybe not quite 200, but that kind of level of pages in here. And you're going to dip in and out of it when you're ready to. You're going to remember some stuff, other stuff you're going to forget. But I really wanted the manifesto to be something that would stick with people, and that they would take with them as they're going out on their adventures, so that they remember to just have a go, to ask for help when they need it, but also to respect their limits if today is not the day. And to remember that, I'll read this little bit out. It says, adventure isn't just something you do, it's part of who you are. Choosing to be an adventurer means choosing to see the possibilities for adventure in every aspect of your life. Start looking at the world around you through this lens, and you might just be surprised by what you find there. And that's kind of really inspired by Al Humphreys, who I admire very much. And something that Al always says is that if it feels like an adventure to you, it is an adventure. And I love that. I absolutely love that, because I am fed up, and I can hear that you guys are fed up as well, of what an adventure is being defined by people who have completely different abilities and capabilities to me. And I want adventure to be defined by the individual that's having it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that really links with forest school, I think, because there's often a kind of preconceptions around forest school and what it should be and what it should look like. And I'm sure lots of us listening, you know, have been in this place as well, where you're kind of new to it, or you don't really know much about it, or you've just started your journey and you're like, right, I've got, you know, it's got to involve fire, for example, or it's got to.
Yes.
I was speaking to somebody recently about this, and they were sort of beginning their forest school journey and saying, you know, I really passionately believe that like every single learner I work with should have access to fire, like there should be fire all the time for them. And I was like, I'm just going to point out that maybe that might not be right for everybody, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That what are you going to do if you do get somebody who is really, really scared? And actually it means that they can't go to forest school because they're really scared of fire, you know, that kind of thing. Fire and tools, and as Lewis described, this kind of elements of hardship and resilience, and, you know, and that's what we're teaching kids by getting them in, you know, into the forest and all this kind of thing. And sort of as you spend more time and you meet more people, you meet more learners, and you sort of go along that journey with them, you realise that actually it's exactly as you said, forest school is whatever the learners want it to be, in the same way as you're saying adventure is whatever you feel like it is. That you're working kind of together with the learners to make it their forest school experience the way they want it to, and that if you can bring in little things to maybe stretch the comfort zone a little bit, but just kind of rigidly sticking to, well, that's what it should be, and that's how you do it is not actually helpful for most humans.
I always think that's one of the markers when I know I've found somebody I'm going to click with, particularly when we go to meetups or when we go and do anything with any other educators, is how it's not a competition, but I'm always amazed at how much you can get out of the smallest story will tell you the most about what that person values. So like I can be I've been completely captivated and like shared awe and wonder with someone when they're talking about a particular learner that went and like picked a flower, and like that's the story, that's it, there's no like and they would have, but like once they give you all the background and they talk about how long, where it took place and all the other bits that went in, you're like, wow, those little moments are that's why we do forest school, because we can choose to value that in a way that someone who's in a top-down system, they don't have the choice about what they value, but we can go, that's the moment, that's the thing. And actually and quite a lot of those stories, they come from, and it occurred to me that this is I feel like a really important choice with your book, is that they come from the second person. They come from that, like the way that the learner described their own experience. It's not, sometimes it's the leader going, oh, and then I saw them do this and then I saw them do this. But more often than not, it's, and then they came up to me and they said, did you see? And I went over here and I did this thing. And like, that level of like, I think that's a big part of the holistic side of forest school, is that like the story is theirs, like and it occurred to me when I was reading your book and thinking about like, oh, this is great, and obviously I'm going through and going, okay, who's this for, who would I recommend it for, and all these things, and it would have been very easy, I think, you could tell me if I'm wrong, to write this book from a place of like 4 leaders, and you could have very easily written it as like, you will have some learners who need this, or you will have some learners who need this. But it's not, it's all written second person perspective, talking to the reader, going, you will need, you might want to ask your leader for this, you might want to ask for that. And like, did you was that intentional? Was that something that cropped up? Applications for Forest School leader training at Children of the Forest are now open. Come and learn with me and Wem at our private woodland down in Devon. Find out more by heading to myforestschooltraining.co.uk. See you there.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was almost an immediate decision. That was something that I thought about at the very beginning when I was putting together the proposal for the book. And as somebody who comes from an education background, if you like, I was briefly a teacher, I've done a master's degree in education, I could have so easily, and probably with more kind of comfort, if you like, written from that perspective of addressing the educator, addressing the practitioner, and doing it at that level. But one of the things that I get frustrated by, and I know that others get frustrated by, not just in the autistic community, but more broadly in the neurodivergent community and also in the disabled community, is having people speak for us when we're perfectly capable of speaking for ourselves. And I just, when I see kind of the voices of another person being platformed when they're talking about us, whoever us might be, that member of the community, I think that was an opportunity for that individual to have their voice and to have their voice heard and to be able to express themselves in the way that they want to be heard, rather than having their story reinterpreted and repackaged in a way that suits the parent or the educator or whoever it might be. And so it was really important for me to write the book from the perspective of empowering that individual to use their voice. And I think a lot of the time that can be terrifying. that can be really scary. People don't have this innate confidence that people want to hear what I have to say or people want to listen to me. And especially for people who've been in this situation of being spoken for, sometimes you don't know what your voice looks like. Sometimes you don't know how to express yourself. You don't have the words, you don't have the kind of shape of what you want to say. And so that's what I wanted to give people with the book. I wanted to give them this example and say, look, this is me as an autistic person, not letting somebody else speak for me. And this is how you can do that as well. And that's what as much as I'm very glad when an educator picks it up, I'm very glad when a practitioner picks it up and learns from it. That's not who I've written the book for. I've written the book for the learners themselves. And that's why it is written the way that it is.
Oh, it's amazing.
Getting a bit emotional, sorry guys.
Well said.
I have been reading it this last couple of weeks, and so I left it in. I've just been sort of getting it out of my bag and putting it on the side around the fire circle or around wherever we are. And it's, I think, for our learners, they're particularly our home ed group, they're slightly too young to access it. They're not yet tweens. Some of them tweens. What's before tweens?
They'll get there.
What's before tweens? Pre-tweens?
Beans.
I think that's just an actual kid.
Beans.
Beans, tweens, and teens.
Beans.
But actually, someone else that was coming to somebody that was working with us picked it up and said, and she also works in outdoor pursuits and does all these kind of things, and she was blown away by it. She was kind of like, oh my god, this is incredible, we need this. She and then she was describing that she'd just been on a training course for, I can't remember what it was, but she said she nearly had a burnout moment midway through the day, but she said the training course, there was no box at all in the sign-up information, so there wasn't any inclusion in the course, but there wasn't even a box on the name, date of birth, you know, there wasn't a do you need any adjustments box. So she was like,
Oh my dear,
you need to, but it's one of those like round table groups, you know, where a different person leads different courses, and she was sort of going, right, get in this book and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to which was amazing because she is neurodivergent, and she was kind of advocating at that like higher level with the book.
That makes me so happy. Very nice indeed.
So was there anything that we haven't touched on that you were like, oh, we definitely people need to know this about the book, or people, you know, you haven't asked me this, Lewis and Wem.
Why haven't you asked me? Let me peruse my notes. Bear with me for a moment, because I'm a very prepared podcast guest and I make my notes in advance. I guess something that we have touched on, but I think it's definitely worth going into a little more detail about, is we talked briefly about kind of having these different range of activities within the book and making sure that things weren't just incredibly sporty or just extreme activities and that kind of thing. But I also think it's worth kind of dwelling on the fact that you can just go outside and exist, and that is cool. Like, you can just go outside, exist there, and you are connecting with nature and you are building that relationship with nature, because that actually ended up being one of the only ways I accessed the outdoors as a teenager. Is that sometimes I would just get to the point where I needed it so badly, but I didn't understand how to access it. That I was really lucky. I grew up on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales. I had access to fields and beautiful landscapes. I could literally walk from my front door, and within 5 minutes I was kind of in the open countryside, which I didn't appreciate enough, but I do now. And just being able to get out there and stop and breathe and not think about anything else. And the value of that is often overlooked in this modern day society of everything is an achievement, and everything is a bucket list item, and everything is a comparison to what the guy over the road did. And so I think, and I'm sure that's something that you guys kind of have with the Forest School as well, in the sense of sometimes learners just don't need to be actively learning anything. They can just be there, and that in itself is the learning experience.
Or maybe just like play Pokemon, but
Yeah.
if you happen to be doing it outside, that is, you know, that's okay with us.
Yeah, but you know what? I've taken, there's so many things that we've taken, because we run really long-term groups, we get to take this like really long-term view of everything that might normally have been condensed down. And it occurred to me this week, I'm just going to, because Wem wasn't in this week, so I'm partly just filling Wem in on what's been happening in the woods. In a classroom setting, you might have like an hour to go input, do the activity, wrap up on the activity, and that's an hour. And so some of the kids have been doing Pokemon card trading, and they've been coming in for like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks now. And this last week just gone, I pulled out, I remembered I had in the back of my car a load of blank playing cards that I was using for story prompts. And they made Pokemon cards, and they started chatting about it and drawing it, and they were talking about the powers, and they were talking about the, and I realized that like what would have been an hour's activity for those learners, they needed 2 or 3 weeks to embed and get all the pre-information before they're ready to do that thing with it. But in that way that like they couldn't have handled that, like it would have just shell shocked them to go like, here's the thing, now do the thing, now come and do the, you know.
It always goes that way. It always goes that way.
Always
That someone brings in something from outside that isn't necessarily a particularly natural or Forest Schooly type thing, like a board game or a particular toy, and we're just going to go with it, and then it always ends up kind of rippling out with people going, I need some wood because I now need to make a board game out of wood with pieces, and I need some paint, and you know, and it always ripples out into something
that doesn't look
is
like Forest School at the start. You've just got to go, it will be in
a
bit.
But that's the beauty of it, is the interconnectedness of literally everything is so lost nowadays. And we can't get too philosophical towards the end of the podcast because people will just give up and close it. But I do think that is something that's so amazing about giving people space, giving people time, giving people the opportunity to process. That's a big thing about autistic brains, is that we are consciously processing a lot of things that neurotypical brains unconsciously process. So for us, it takes so much longer to, for example, engage with an activity like that, or to make sense of something that's happened, or to prepare to do something, because we are consciously running through that in a way that other brains do naturally and don't kind of really think about. And so having that opportunity, as I said, that space, that time, just means that the interconnectedness of everything can really embed itself and can really flourish in a way that doesn't happen when it's just ticking along in the background, and then you get there and you're like, cool, okay, today we're drawing Pokemon cards. Like that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't had the whole context as you were just describing, which is what makes it so beautiful.
Yes.
Allie, I have one just before you go, and it's just occurred to me. I'm gonna pitch an idea, and you can. But if it's a good one, I'm copywriting it, and the three of us can have it. All right?
Okay.
The people listening
cool.
can't have this. There are lots of neurospicy people who connect more with the more than human in the world, be that flora or fauna. Do you think there is room for a book similarly structured to this one, but about different animals? And like, if you have a particular interest in birds, what bird watching might look like, and the way that birds move and the noises, and like, oh, if you're particularly interested in badgers, then this is what you might need to, you know, this is what badger fur feels like, and this is what you might experience with their scat, and this is what you might, you know, you need to be able to do it at night. And like, there's got to be something there, right? Tell me.
So, number one, that idea is copyrighted. All listeners, you can be on the wait list for the book. You can be on the wait list. Number two, my favourite animals are goats, and I absolutely adore goats. And so already I'm thinking like, a chapter on goats, I can spend a whole chapter just talking about them, and people will actually want me to. Incredible.
Yeah.
But also, how amazing would it be if each chapter you got a different neurospicy person to write about their favorite animal?
Yeah.
So it's not
do you think
that
they'd
I'm
have enough
trying to.
special interest to know about it though, or do you think we?
Yeah,
I'm just.
You were
Definitely.
You were doing right.
110%. And if they didn't know, they would be so committed to finding out. Like the amount of information that we can get out of resources that people are just like, surely you can't figure out that. And I'm like, give me 2 hours and I can tell you anything.
Oh,
So it's a
amazing.
thing. It's going to be coming. Get ready.
Oh, Ali, thank you so much for being with us this evening. If people want to find out more about the book or you, or what you're up to next, like where can they find that out?
Gosh, so I have a website, which is www.allywrote.com, and I'm also the same name on social media. I'm on Instagram and TikTok, so that's at Allie Wrote, and I will spell that because I know that's helpful. So that's ALLIEWROTE. And I love it. I absolutely love it when readers get in touch with me and let me know what they think of the book. And even if it's constructive criticism, I'm open to it. I like to learn. But if you just want to be friends, that's cool too.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Bye.
You can get ad-free episodes of the Forest School podcast, as well as bonus episodes and exclusive access to upcoming guests to ask them questions before anybody else finds out about it, simply by visiting patreon.com/Children of the Forest.